You did something small today. Maybe you held a door open for someone who was moving slowly. Maybe you sent a message you had been putting off. Maybe you chose not to say the thing that would have felt satisfying to say, but would have cost someone else something. Maybe you did the opposite of all of these. Maybe you were short with someone who did not deserve it. Maybe you avoided the thing that needed doing for the third day in a row. Maybe you were kind in a way no one noticed, and you did not think about it again. Most of what we do is small. Most of what we do happens in the margins of the large things, in the ordinary moments between the decisions that feel significant. The way you spoke to the person at the register, the way you responded to the email that annoyed you, the way you handled the 5 minutes of unexpected waiting, the way you were, or were not, present in a conversation that did not require you to be. These small things do not feel like the story. The story feels like the large decisions, the moments of crisis or change or choice that seem to define the direction of a life. But there is something the Buddhist tradition has been pointing at for 25 centuries that is harder to see and more important. The small things are the story. Not because any single small thing changes everything, because the accumulation of small things, repeated across days and months and years, builds the person who will face the large decisions when they arrive. You are not deciding who you are in the large moments. You are revealing, in the large moments, who the small moments have been building. Before we begin, leave one word in the comments tonight. One word for the small thing you did today that felt like it might matter, even a little. Kind, patient, honest, present, avoided. Whatever is most true, someone will read it and recognize the same quiet weight of the ordinary. If this channel is finding you something worth returning to, the subscribe button is there. It costs nothing. Now, let your eyes close if they are ready. Tonight we move between two worlds. The first is yours, a nurse in Chicago who has been working the overnight shift for 11 years and who wonders, sometimes, in the specific exhaustion of 4 in the morning, whether any of it is accumulating into anything. A teacher in Portland who has taught the same grade for 16 years and who will never know what became of most of the children who sat in her classroom. A man in Boston who has been trying, for 2 years, to be less reactive with his teenage son, and who fails more often than he succeeds, and who is not sure whether the trying is making any difference. And a woman in Atlanta who has spent 15 years doing work she believes in and has never been recognized for it, and who lies awake sometimes wondering whether belief is enough. The second world is older. A Tang dynasty gardener who tended the same garden for 40 years and understood, on his last morning, what he had actually been growing. A Japanese monk of the Heian period who swept the same courtyard every morning for 20 years and found, in the sweeping, something he had not found in any of his formal practice. A Tibetan woman who gave small acts of kindness to everyone she met across a long life without keeping any account of them, and whose students, after her death, tried to count what she had given and could not. A Korean farmer who planted trees he knew he would not live to sit under, and who gave, in the planting, something to people he would never meet. And a very old Vietnamese teacher who was asked what he had accomplished across a long life of practice and teaching, and who said, simply, that he had tried to be the same person in the small moments as he hoped to be in the large ones, and that this had been more than enough work for one lifetime. These stories are contemplative in nature, offered for rest and reflection, not as medical or therapeutic advice. Feel the body right now, the body that did small things today, the hands, the voice, the attention that went where it went, all of it accumulating, quietly, into whoever is lying here tonight. The stories are waiting. Maria had been a nurse for 11 years. She worked the overnight shift at a hospital in Chicago, which meant that her life had the specific shape that overnight shifts give to a life. Sleeping in the afternoon, moving through the city in the opposite direction of most of its movement, being present for people in the hours when the body and the fear are most exposed. She was good at her work. This was not in question. The work was also, in ways she did not often say out loud, relentless. The specific relentlessness of a job in which the need is continuous and the supply of any one person's care is finite. She had a question she returned to sometimes, in the specific hours around 4 in the morning when the ward was quiet and the work was momentarily not demanding her full attention. The question was whether any of it was adding up to anything. Not the large outcomes. Those were visible enough. People arrived sick and left less sick, or they did not leave, and both of those things were real and consequential. That was not what she was asking about. She was asking about the small things. The way she held someone's hand during a procedure. The specific tone she chose when delivering news that was hard to hear. The moment, repeated across 11 years, when she noticed that a patient was afraid and decided to say something about the fear rather than moving past it. These things happened, and then they were over. The patients left. She did not know, in most cases, what had become of them. She did not know whether the hand-holding had mattered beyond the moment. She did not know whether her specific tone, chosen carefully across 11 years of choosing it, had done anything beyond being chosen. She sat in the quiet at 4 in the morning and wondered whether the accumulated weight of all those small choices was building anything, or whether each one simply happened and was gone. In the city of Chang'an, during the Tang dynasty, in the early 9th century, there was a gardener named Kongxin, not the nun of the quiet room, but a lay gardener who had been given the same name by a teacher he admired. A man who had tended the garden of a mid-ranking official's household for 40 years. He was 67 years old. The garden was not famous. It was the private garden of a household that was comfortable but not remarkable. And the garden reflected this: well-tended, pleasant, not the kind of place that was discussed in the literary circles, where gardens of unusual beauty were noticed and described. He had tended it for 40 years because it was his work, and because the work was real, and because a garden, tended, becomes something that an untended garden is not. On the last morning before his retirement, he walked through the garden slowly, not working, simply looking. He had not done this before, or not intentionally. Every morning for 40 years, he had entered the garden with a purpose, with the specific attention of someone who is assessing what the garden needs and doing what it needs. This morning, he had no purpose. He was leaving. The new gardener would come next week. He walked through the garden and looked at what 40 years of daily attention had produced. What he saw was not what he had made in any particular session. It was what 40 years of small decisions had accumulated into. The specific angle at which the path curved near the water feature, which had been adjusted incrementally across 2 decades until it arrived at something that felt right, without any single adjustment having been the decisive one. The quality of the moss on the stone walls, which grew as moss grows, gradually and without supervision, but which had been given the conditions it needed to grow well by decisions made so long ago he no longer remembered making them. The proportion of shade and light across the garden's different sections, which had arrived at a particular quality of balance through hundreds of small decisions about which branches to prune and which to let continue. He had not made any of this in the way that an artist makes something in a single sustained act of creation. He had made it the way time makes things, incrementally, through the accumulation of small acts that were each unremarkable in themselves and remarkable only in their sum. He sat in the garden for a long time on his last morning. He understood something that the 40 years of daily attention had not, until this last morning, made fully clear to him. He had understood the garden as his work. What he had not understood until this morning was what the garden had been his work on. The garden was one outcome, but the gardener, who had made 1,000 small decisions across 40 years, each decision requiring a particular quality of attention and care, that gardener was another outcome. And that outcome was, he understood on his last morning, the more significant one. The garden would eventually change under the new gardener's hands, as gardens do. But what 40 years of careful small attention had grown in him was not a garden. It was a capacity for careful small attention that had become, after 40 years, simply who he was. He had been growing the garden had been growing him. He wrote to his son, who was considering whether to take up the same trade or pursue something with more visible reward. The garden I have tended will outlast my tending of it, but what the tending has grown in me will outlast the garden. Do not choose your work by what it produces. Choose it by what the doing of it, done well and with full attention across many years, will grow in you. Maria, in her 4 a.m. quiet in Chicago, did not know that she had been growing something. She had been asking whether the small things were adding up. They were adding up. They were adding up in the patient who would remember, across years, the nurse who had spoken about the fear. They were adding up in the ward that held, in its particular quality, the residue of 11 years of careful attention. And they were adding up in Maria herself, in the person who could notice fear in another person at 4 a.m. after 11 years of overnight shifts and still choose to say something about it, which was not a small thing at all, but had grown from the accumulated small things. She could not see this from inside it. That is the nature of what grows slowly. Let the hands rest open now, the hands that did small things today. Whatever they did, it was not nothing. It never is. And as Kongxian walks through his garden on the last morning and finds what 40 years of small attention has grown, we travel now to Japan, where a monk found in the sweeping of a courtyard something he had not found in any of his formal practice. Catherine had taught 4th grade in Portland for 16 years. She was 44 years old, and in 16 years of teaching she had had, by rough calculation, approximately 400 students. She remembered many of them clearly. She had heard from a few of them over the years, the occasional message from a former student who had found her on the school's website and wanted to say something. She did not know what had become of most of them. This was the ordinary condition of teaching, and she had made her peace with it in the way that teachers make peace with it, which is imperfectly and repeatedly. You gave the year, and then the year was over, and the students went to 5th grade, and then middle school, and then out of your knowledge entirely. What stayed with her, in the specific way that things stay with people who have done the same work for a long time, was the question of whether she had done it well. Not the curriculum, not the test scores. The other part, the part that was not measurable and was the part she most cared about. Whether she had been the kind of teacher who made a child feel seen. Not every day. She knew she had not done it every day. There were days when she was tired and the classroom was difficult, and what she had to give was adequate rather than good. She had given adequate on those days and hoped it was enough. But the question returned in the specific quiet of the classroom after the students had left for the day, a question she could not answer because the evidence was dispersed across 400 children who were now living lives she could not see. She sat in the empty classroom one afternoon and held the question without expecting it to be answered. In the mountains east of Kyoto, in the early years of the Heian period, in the 9th century, there was a monk named Gikan, not the Tang hermit or the monastery builder, but a different practitioner of the same name, a young monk in a small temple who had been given, as his primary assignment the task of sweeping the main courtyard. He was 27 years old. He had come to the monastery with serious intentions and genuine eagerness, and a specific picture of what monastic practice would be, which included long hours of formal meditation and close study of the texts, and conversation with teachers who would guide his understanding. The sweeping was not in this picture. He swept every morning. The courtyard was large, and the task took approximately an hour, and the task was, in itself, exactly what it appeared to be: the movement of a broom across a stone surface to remove the leaves and dust that had accumulated overnight. He did it because he had been asked to do it, and because refusing would have been a different kind of problem than the mild tedium of the sweeping itself. He did it for 3 years. In the 4th year, something changed that he could not immediately name. The change was not dramatic. The sweeping was the same sweeping, but his relationship to it had shifted. He had been sweeping in the way that a person does a task they are waiting to finish. Each morning, a portion of his attention was on the sweeping and a portion was elsewhere, in the meditation session that would follow, in the teaching he was hoping for, in the understanding that the sweeping was delaying. At some point in the 4th year, the elsewhere portion of his attention came home. He was sweeping, and he was simply sweeping. The broom on the stone, the specific sound of it, the quality of the morning light on the courtyard at the hour the sweeping happened, the particular resistance of damp leaves versus dry ones, the way the dust moved differently in different kinds of air. None of this was remarkable. All of it was here. He understood somewhere in the 4th year of the sweeping that this was the practice. Not a practice that was preparing him for the practice itself, the full attention brought to the ordinary thing, the choice, repeated each morning, to be entirely in the sweeping rather than partially somewhere else. And he understood something further. The sweeping was changing him, not because sweeping had any particular spiritual significance, because the act of bringing his full attention to an ordinary thing, repeated every morning for years, was building a capacity for full attention that was not limited to the sweeping. It was becoming the quality of his attention in general. He would bring it to the meditation sessions, and to the teachings, and to the conversations with teachers. But it had grown in the sweeping, because the sweeping was where he had practiced it. He said to a novice many years later, who had been given the same assignment and was visibly impatient with it, "The courtyard does not need your full attention. You need your full attention. The courtyard is simply where you practice giving it." Catherine, in her empty classroom in Portland, had been giving her full attention to 400 children across 16 years. She could not see what that had grown in them. She could feel, sitting in the quiet of the afternoon classroom, what it had grown in her. A specific quality of noticing, of being able to look at a child and see something real about where they were that morning, something underneath the surface of how they were presenting. This quality had not been there when she started. It had grown from 16 years of trying to see. She had been teaching children to read and think. The teaching had been teaching her to see. Let the body settle completely now. Everything that was given today, in attention or care or patience or presence, was not lost. It is in the giver as much as the receiver. And as Gikan sweeps the courtyard in the early Heian morning, with his full attention finally home, we come now to the last story, to a Korean farmer and a very old Vietnamese teacher. David had been trying, for 2 years, to be less reactive with his son. He was in Boston, 47 years old, and his son was 16, and the specific difficulty of a father and a 16-year-old son was, in their household, a difficulty that David had decided to work on rather than simply endure. He had not been reactive in a dramatic way. He had not been cruel or abusive. He had been in the ordinary way of fathers who carry their own history into their parenting, sometimes too sharp and sometimes too dismissive, and sometimes, when he was tired, simply not present in a way his son could feel. He had decided to work on this 2 years ago. The working on it had not produced the results he had imagined. He still got sharp sometimes. He still dismissed sometimes. He was present more often than he had been, and he knew this, but the presence was inconsistent, and the inconsistency troubled him because his son was 16 and the window was not unlimited. He lay awake sometimes and reviewed the day. He gave himself a rough score. Most days were not what he had hoped for. Some days were worse. A few days, and these he held carefully, were genuinely better. He was not sure whether the trying was making any difference. 2 years of trying, and he was still, too often, the father he had been trying to stop being. He did not know that his son had noticed the trying, not the results of the trying, which were inconsistent, the trying itself, the reaching for something different even when what emerged was not yet different. His son had not said this. It was not the kind of thing a 16-year-old says to his father, but he had noticed. In the province of Jeolla in southern Korea, in the mid-15th century, during the early Joseon period, there was a farmer named Sonam Rinchen, not the scholar or the trader, but a different man, a farmer of 60 years who spent the last decade of his working life planting trees. Not fruit trees, not trees that would serve any practical purpose in his lifetime. Long-growing trees, the kind that take 50 or 100 years to reach the size at which they become useful for timber or shade. He had begun this in his 61st year, not from any instruction or tradition, but from the specific understanding of a man who has farmed the same land for 40 years and has watched certain things diminish across that time. The shade trees that had been on the property when he was young had been cut for timber a generation before. The land was more exposed now than it had been. In summer, the heat was harder on the crops. In autumn, the wind had more purchase on the soil. He planted trees he would not live to sit under. His neighbors found this amusing in a gentle way. The trees he was planting would not be trees in any useful sense until his grandchildren were old. He himself would see, at best, saplings. He said to a neighbor who asked about it, "Someone planted the trees I sat under when I was young. I did not know who. I will not know who sits under these. That seems right to me." He planted trees for 10 years, until his body would no longer allow the work. His grandson, who was 7 when the planting began and 17 when it ended, remembered the planting. He carried the memory of it across his own life, which was long. And when he was old, he planted trees himself. He did not know whether his grandfather had intended this. He did not know whether the planting had been, in any conscious way, a transmission. He only knew that watching his grandfather plant trees for people he would never meet had given him something he could not name precisely, but that had been present in him when, at 65, he found himself at the edge of his own land with a shovel and a sapling. The tree his grandfather had planted when he was 7 was, by then, large enough to sit under. He sat under it for a long time on the afternoon he planted his own sapling. He thought about the chain of it. The unknown person who had planted the tree his grandfather had sat under. His grandfather, himself. The unknown person who would eventually sit under the tree he was planting today. None of them would meet. All of them were connected by the specific act of planting something for someone they would never know. He said to his own grandson, who was there that afternoon, "I cannot tell you what your life will add up to. No one can tell you that. But I can tell you that the small things you do with full attention and genuine care accumulate into something real, even when you cannot see it, even when it will not be visible in your lifetime. Your great-great-grandfather planted a tree. I am sitting under it today. He did not know me. He gave me this anyway. David, lying awake in Boston, reviewing his imperfect day, did not know that his son had noticed the trying. He did not know that the trying, even when it failed, was planting something. He only knew that he had tried, and that the trying had been real, and that tomorrow he would try again. This was the tree, not the results, the trying itself. The tree takes a long time. That is not a flaw in the tree. That is what trees do. Let the breath be slow now. Think of one small thing you did today with genuine care, however imperfect the execution. That is a tree. It will grow in its own time. We have been in two worlds tonight. The world you know, Maria in Chicago, tending the fear of strangers at 4 in the morning for 11 years, and wondering whether any of it is accumulating into anything. Catherine in Portland, giving her full attention to 400 children she will mostly never hear from again. And David in Boston, trying to be a different father than the one his history would make him, 2 years into a trying that has not yet produced the results he hoped for, but has not stopped producing. And the older world, where a Tang gardener walked through his garden on the last morning and understood that 40 years of small attention had grown something in him that was more significant than any garden. Where a Heian monk discovered, in the 4th year of sweeping the same courtyard, that the sweeping was not the delay before the practice, but the practice itself. And where a Korean farmer planted trees for people he would never meet and gave his grandson something that his grandson, decades later, would give to someone he would never meet. Two worlds, the same quiet accumulation. You did small things today. Some of them you did well, and some you did poorly, and most of them you have already forgotten. They were not nothing. The Buddhist teaching on karma, stripped of its complexity, is this: the quality of attention and intention you bring to your actions accumulates in you. Not as reward or punishment, as character, as the person you are becoming through the repeated small choices of who to be in the ordinary moments. You are not deciding who you are in the large moments. You are revealing, in the large moments, who the small moments have been building. The nurse who holds a hand, the teacher who tries to see, the father who reaches for something different, even when what emerges is not yet different, the gardener who tends, the monk who sweeps, the farmer who plants trees he will never sit under. All of them growing something, all of them not knowing fully what. Tonight, whatever you did today, it was part of the growing. Even the failures, perhaps especially the failures, which show up tomorrow as the knowledge of what to try differently. Let the names dissolve: Maria, Catherine, David, Kongshin, Giken, the Korean farmer. What remains is what has always been here. Breath arriving, body held, the small person doing small things in the dark, which is not small at all. Good night. Every small thing you do is quietly changing you. Before you go, something small. I made this channel because I believe that the small things, the quality of attention you bring to ordinary moments, matter more than most of us have been told they matter. If tonight gave you one moment of taking that seriously, I am genuinely glad. Leave one word in the comments if you feel like it. One small thing you did today. Someone will read it, and recognize the same quiet weight. And if the quiet Dharma is somewhere you want to return, the subscribe button is there. It costs nothing. It just means the next time a night like this one comes, this will be waiting. Good night. Every small thing you do is quietly changing you.